Hello all, I'm Kel Kidman, welcome to Breaking Out Daily, and today we begin with CNN's Ana Navarro suggesting who gets vaccines first should be based in part on a political history if they're a politician. So, this is interesting because not necessarily a story, this story isn't particularly important, it's just about how CNN's Ana Navarro is talking about how people she doesn't like should not be getting the vaccine first and all that sort of stuff. But what I wanted to talk about more is why the phenomenon exists that people who are advocating for vaccines being mandatory are also seemingly the ones who are also advocating for this sort of preferential treatment with vaccines. And in this case, it seems as though to me that it's in a lot of the cases, it seems to be a tendency among people to have these sorts of disparate views where they don't want to have, all of these sorts of people who they consider to be bad. It's kind of a result of authoritarian thinking, where you think of these things as good, and the vaccine, good. So we're going to have the vaccine be mandatory because it's good, and all of these people everyone should get it because it's good. But at the same time, you think to yourself, well, there are these people who are bad, and they shouldn't get these good things. And that's sort of the authoritarian mindset that a lot of people have. You see this a lot of times in places like Bolshevik Russia. China is a good example in modern times, where you have these sorts of declarations of certain good things that should be human rights, but among people who are dissidents and the people who are who they consider to be bad are taken out of the people who deserve that sort of thing. It's quite an interesting phenomenon because you wouldn't expect those sorts of people to do that, especially from the outset when they're not in power. And it's something you need to look out for because a lot of these people, a lot of these authoritarians, these communists, and those sorts and the like, will signal to you within their language about how they speak of good things and bad things, and how they speak specifically about bad people who they construe as bad people. You can see it from how they think they should be treated in how authoritarian they may be. For instance, for me, I'm not particularly interested in all things that are good being mandatory and all things that are bad being banned. I don't believe that's the purpose of the government. I believe the purpose of the government is essentially to legislate evil. And for those who don't know, I have a particular definition of what bad and evil mean. Which I guess I'll explain in brief here, though I have explained in more detail in the past. Essentially, evil is the violation of someone's natural rights, and bad is just immoral things. So things like overeating is bad, but something like robbery is evil. That's the Cliff Notes version of that, but it is interesting to see these sorts of people really show their full colors. Something like COVID, which is this huge, panicky situation, has really revealed over this whole time just how much so many people are insistent upon certain authoritarian ideas. I mean, it's really funny to see all of these sorts of articles come out with from CNN, Guardian, and all those sorts of places, talking about how, oh man, Trump hasn't been good enough on the COVID response. He hasn't done a national strategy. He hasn't done all of these things. He hasn't put in the National Defense Production Act and, all those sorts of things that they expect him to do. It's been very interesting and funny to see that because it really does show that they weren't interested in him not being a fascist, as that is exactly what a fascist would do, just in case you don't understand what a fascist is. But rather, the interesting thing is that Trump did not do that. What he did is he took a federalist strategy, giving guidelines to what the state should maybe do, but mostly leaving it up to the individual states of the republic to decide their own response, which is exactly how it should be done, because all 50 states have their own character, have their own, in a sense, national character. the character of California and the character of Maine, or the character of, a Midwest West state like Michigan or something like that, are very different. They have very different characters, and thus they have different particular policies that they would be accepting of or not accepting of. And, South Dakota's response shouldn't be California's response, and vice versa. That's something that Donald Trump clearly understands, but it's not something that the national media understands, despite claiming to not be fascist. In other words, people who believe in the state, nothing but the state, and nothing outside of the state, all within the state, that sort of stuff. It's very funny to see that. But anyway, on to our next story, and this is a huge story that has been talked about ad nauseum, where they've talked about how this sort of, the stimulus bill and the omnibus spending package that has come along with it. Because for those who don't know, for those who don't know, the Congress has now passed a 6,000-page stimulus bill for the coronavirus. Though, of course, the 6,000-page stimulus bill is not just the coronavirus. There's been a lot of fake news and propaganda surrounding this bill that's been at least partially inaccurate. The stimulus bill, in fact, is only a small part of a much larger omnibus spending bill. And as someone on the right and someone who believes in fiscal conservatism, I really don't like omnibus spending bills. I really think that all of these bills should be passed essentially independently of each other, and they shouldn't be put in this huge package that is either all taken, and all of the bad parts with the good, or none of it taken. It's such a silly thing, especially when it's such a huge spending bill. It's like a $3.4 trillion spending bill in all, and $900 billion of that is the COVID spending bill, which is a $600 check, which is ridiculous. Just give me a $600 tax break. That would be fine. That would be more than fine, because it would be more efficient. It would be more effective. You wouldn't have to pay a bunch of administrators to send out freaking checks and all that sort of stuff. But the large controversies with regard to this stimulus bill have not a lot to do with the COVID spending or anything like that. Rather, the bigger controversies surrounding this bill have regarded copyright and certain copyright additions to this bill that are controversial. Particularly the part of the bill that is controversial is really the wrong part that should be controversial. So, to give you the rundown on what people have a problem with, there has been a addition to the bill which makes it a felony to have to run a streaming service which whole purpose is to stream copyrighted materials without a license. So, how this is being construed is that Twitch streamers essentially would be slammed with a felony and potential jail time because of this bill and this part of the bill. However, that isn't what this is actually supposed to do. And for that to happen, it would require a completely nonsensical and, frankly, completely insane interpretation from the courts, which I don't expect to ever happen. What this is actually tailored for, and it's actually very specifically tailored for in the language of the bill, it's very specific. It's actually not a particularly badly written part of this bill. There are much worse written parts, and I'll get to that. All right, there are other copyright bits that are more controversial, and I'm more on the fence about. But this particular part is not a problem, because specifically this part of the bill does not affect individual users. It cannot affect individual users. It can only affect the platforms themselves. So even if this does affect Twitch, it wouldn't affect the streamers on Twitch. It wouldn't affect a streamer who accidentally or even on purpose streams a unlicensed song or something like that. It doesn't have anything to do with that. Because the bill specifically says someone who's running a service that streams these things. So even if it was to affect Twitch, it would only affect Twitch.tv, the platform, not Twitch streamers. But even in that case, it doesn't actually affect Twitch.tv. It's specifically going after the sorts of streaming platforms that would be that are constantly streaming, say, pirated anime or pirated TV shows or movies and that sort of thing. Things like, those sorts of platforms. I think famous one is Kiss Anime. I don't think Kiss Anime still exists. I'm not sure. I don't freaking know. It's been years since I've gone on it. I've dropped my pirating ways by and large over the past few years. By and large, I'm still not completely out of it. But by and large, there are certain things that are unavoidable with certain things that I like. Kamen Rider in specific. Not this series. This series is on Amazon Prime, which, by the way, watch it. It's good. But that's beside the point. What this may affect, actually, on that note, what this may affect is actually, in terms of things I would actually care about and things that might end up being a problem, are things like fan translation sites. So something like a Mangatex, or, the sorts of fan translations you have for Kamen Rider, the show that I really like. These websites might be affected because they are actually running a service which is, in a large respect, designed to not necessarily stream, because you don't get a lot of streaming sites for Kamen Rider. They're mostly torrents and that sort of stuff. But to distribute unauthorized, unlicensed, copyrighted works to the masses. And this is kind of a gray area, because Kamen Rider, though there are official releases done for Kuga and the original series, it's a mostly unlicensed series in the West, where the modern shows particularly are almost completely untranslated by any official sources, aren't really done in put out in the West by Toei at all. It's been a huge problem for a long time. Though they are opening it up very slowly, it's still not, it's still not up to the standard where I can realistically stop, pirating if I want to actually watch the new show. And so what ends up happening? It'll be interesting to see how this affects it, because this is a legitimate potential problem. But I don't see it to be a huge problem, especially since it won't affect someone like me, or it won't affect someone like you. It has nothing to do with these sorts of things. A lot of that's overblown. And yeah, it's possible, but only through completely insane court system, court interpretation. What the actual potential problem with this whole omnibus spending, in terms of copyright, it doesn't really have anything to do with this, and it is something called the Case Act, rather. The Case Act is about creating a small claims court for copyright cases in the U.S. Now, this is something that has existed in places like the U.K. for a long time, and the U.S. has really needed a small claims court for copyright cases for a long time because, frankly, our court system is slow. The judges have a lot on their dockets already, and there's a whole lot more copyright cases that are going around nowadays. And so you need more of a small claims court to have a lot of the smaller copyright claimants have a realistic way of getting these sorts of copyright justice and that sort of thing. But there are problems with this act. The main one being potentially that people can just opt out of it if they want. So if you sue, say, Disney for using your copyrighted material in an unauthorized fashion, what they can do is say, okay, you can sue in this small claims court, but then they'll just say, no, I don't want to do it, and I'll opt out. And if you want to sue me, you got to sue me in federal court. And this is a problem, mostly because what ends up happening is that the federal court is, of course, much more expensive, and much more expensive, and it takes much longer. And a lot of the people who have these sorts of grievances aren't even going to bother filing because it's simply too expensive to file. And so this might end up being a problem. And, there's also the sort of, and I think this is overblown, criticisms of it saying, oh, all these big copyright claimants, people like Disney and the like, are just going to abuse it. They're going to say, oh yeah, I'm going to sue every YouTuber under the sun for unauthorized use of my copyrighted material for $30,000, and I'm going to keep doing that over and over again. Now, I don't think this is going to happen. Reason being is that it's probably too much of a freaking hassle to do it. You might as well do a DMCA claim. There are other ways to do it, what is missed is that there are other ways to do it if you don't want to sue, and you don't want to, the thing is that $30,000 for a copyright claimant like Disney, it is pennies. It is a rounding error. It's not a huge deal for them. For them, it's not worth going through the trouble. They might as well just do a DMCA claim and be done with it, essentially. So for them, there's no real advantage to that sort of thing. So I think that's overblown. But for this bill, it's interesting because I have a kind of mixed opinion on it in terms of the CASE Act specifically. In terms of the Omnibus bill, don't vote for it. I want Trump to veto it because it's too large. I hate omnibus spending bills. Stop it. Especially considering they had 2 hours to read it. It's just ridiculous. Right? The whole process for omnibus spending bills has always been ridiculous. And it just needs to end. It really does. It really just needs to end. But, for the CASE Act specifically, it seems as though it's kind of on the fence. I'm kind of on the fence. I don't know. Really, the U.S. does need a small claims court for copyright. We really do, because there's been a whole lot more copyright cases as of recent. Because of things like the internet, because of our culture that has become rampantly piratous and completely unwilling to acknowledge people's IP, it has become much more of a problem as of recently. And you need these sorts of small claims court, especially for smaller copyright owners who are having their copyright infringed by larger copyright owners. You really do need this sort of stuff. But I'm on the fence. Because at the same time, this looks like it could potentially be abused and isn't specifically fit to purpose. It needs to be more fit to purpose, and I think it should be amended. I don't think this should be thrown out entirely, because the idea of a small claims court is a good idea, but the language needs to be changed, and I think the opting out process, I think there is a place for an opting out process, but it needs to be changed slightly, and it certainly needs to be harder, and I think, frankly, there should... what the solution would potentially be is that you can file for an opt-out of the system, but it needs to be, it needs to be ruled on. You can't just opt out and then have it go through automatically. It needs to be something that you opt out, you try to opt out, you essentially try to dismiss it, and then it gets judged. There's a judgment on that dismissal and opt out into the federal court system. I think that would be a good solution. And if that solution came into place, I would be totally for this bill, because really, we do need a small claims court for copyright cases. People need to be able to protect their own copyright against small claims. It just needs to happen that way. And, on to our next story. It's still kind of tangentially related, but not super related. The GDP has increased by 33.4%, a record 33.4% annual rate in third quarter. Now, this comes after the GDP decrease by about 31% in quarter two. It's oh my gosh, this year economically has been a wild ride, an extremely wild ride. I mean, this is incomparable to things like the Depression, and you still have people saying, "Oh yeah, we should lock down. We should lock down for 2-3 months." Yeah, that's a good idea. Jeez, it's so infuriating to see this sort of stuff. I mean, I'm sure you can tell by a lot of my recent videos that I am getting infuriated with the COVID response and just how authoritarian and ridiculous it has gotten. But this is just more evidence to the fact, because our economy's not dead. All right. I don't think our economy is inherently ready for a recession. If we don't destroy it ourselves. All we need to do is open up. Really, it's all we need to do, and it will bounce back. It really will. Will we have a problem of having a lot less independent small businesses in the interim for a few years? Yeah, we will. We really have lost a lot. And it is a shame. It is an utter shame. And a shame on those politicians. And a shame on all those people who advocated for this sort of policy. That this happened. That all of these people have lost their livelihoods, have lost their businesses. Shame on them. And they really do need to be shamed. And all of these people should be voted out of office. All of these people. We need to get a completely new political class in. A completely new political class in. I don't think I'm going to be voting for pretty much any incumbent next time around in 2022. I'm not going to be voting for any incumbent. Seriously, shame on them. Shame on them. But it will bounce back. All of this sort of stuff is temporary. And, people have a tendency to believe that the economy as it is how it always will be. You see this with sort of the Facebook stuff and the belief that alt-tech is destined to fail no matter what happens. And you see this also in the small business area, where you're saying that, all of these small businesses will close. So all of these small businesses will never come back, and there will never be any more new small businesses. No, that's not true. It's not true. People don't sit frozen in time like that. It will change. Of course it will. And that's something that not only needs to be accepted, but readily prepared for. You need to be able to be prepared for any given change that will inevitably come your way in terms of the economy and that sort of thing. So, this year for small businesses has been really bad. But that doesn't mean every year from now on is going to be really bad. Not if we don't let it. Okay? We need to let the economy come back. We need to force the economy to come back in a lot of areas. If your businesses are closed in your area, you need to go around, you need to talk to your community. You need to talk in your local community. You need to say, hey, we're going to just ignore all of these orders. You need to get your sheriff on board. You need to call your sheriff. You need to call your county sheriff. You need to call your city council. You need to call all of those people. You need to go through the local areas. Because the state governments and the federal governments, the federal government and even the state government, are not going to be as responsive to you as your local government, as your sheriff. You need to go and talk to your local community. You need to say, hey, if they're going to put business restrictions on us, and they're going to put all these onerous restrictions on us, and they're going to shut down our businesses, we need to just not do that. We just need to not do that. And that is it. And I'm lucky. I'm in a place where that really isn't happening. In southern Utah, there's almost no business restrictions. A lot of the places you have to wear masks and whatever. But that's not really worth, fighting against, at least not at this point. At least in comparison to actual business closings, like are happening in New York. But if you live in a place like New York, if you live in a place where there's all these extremely onerous or completely ridiculous restrictions that are just limiting you and are completely preventing you from doing business, you need to talk with your local community. You need to get in and you need to say, hey, we need to go and do this. We need to go and just ignore it. Really, you need to do that. And you might say that I'm sort of, looking in from the outside and not doing a lot of this sort of stuff. And that is somewhat accurate. But I am in a sort of lucky position. And I need to change too, I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying that I'm here and I'm this super brave person, because really, I'm not. I'm not this super brave person. I'm brave enough to be able to go out and talk about my political positions online and talk about it publicly and that sort of thing. But obviously, I'm not, as brave as to be able to just say, screw you to my local police department or even my state police department and that sort of thing. I'm not that brave, and I fully admit that. But that doesn't mean we need to stop. That doesn't mean that I need to stop. I need to get better, obviously. And I try to get better every day, and so do you. Really, you do need to do that sort of stuff. But anyway, on to our last story of the day. And this one's interesting, because Google and Facebook agreed to cooperate with antitrust suits against the U.S. government. And this is interesting because 10 states have sued Google over antitrust, and I think 48 states have sued Facebook over antitrust. And it's so, these antitrust suits are so funny, because I've never seen an instance in which antitrust has ever worked. I mean, really, when has an antitrust suit ever made it so that the industry in which it is trying to deal with has become less monopolistic? When has that ever happened? I don't think it's ever happened. Really, I don't think it's ever happened. Feel free to name a time in the comments or wherever, and I really suggest you do, because I just have never seen antitrust ever work, ever actually function as is intended. And it's really funny to see this sort of thing happen. And all these people claim, oh, Google's a monopoly because of the free market, or Facebook's a monopoly because of the free market, when these companies get hundreds of millions of dollars in government funds and government subsidies in order to do what they want. You know, YouTube has been famously unprofitable. I don't think they've ever been profitable. That might have changed in the interim years since I've really looked into it, but they've never been profitable. The only reason that YouTube still exists today is because of government subsidies. Google has not gotten, from the latest numbers I have, which by the way are from 2014, $600 million from the government. $600 million. That's not pennies. That's not chump change. It's a lot of money. And people are sitting around there saying that that Google is not somehow functionally a part of the state and is a free market company, a private company. Completely ridiculous. These people are funded by the government. And if you're funded by the government, functionally you are the government. The reason no one has been able to compete with Google until very recently is because of this. Facebook isn't any better. I think they've gotten upwards of $300 million or even more for government funds. $300 million. That's also nothing to scoff at, much less than Google, but obviously nothing to scoff at. And that's why these companies are so monolithic, because they have an infinite money supply in the form of the government. The problem here is the government, and this is something that a lot of people miss. People do not care about the fact that all of this money is just flowing out of the government, because it turns out the government has the power to just give to whatever company it wants all these subsidies and all this sort of stuff. And this has been something that people are eminently for in a lot of cases. It is so ridiculous that so many people are pro-government subsidies and want the government to be more involved in the economy, as if it makes it any better. It's so funny to see all of these examples, because this is a common result from a lot of the sort of examples you'll get from the socialistic types about how the free market can create monopolies. When in almost every single instance in which there was an actual monopoly that lasted a long time and was actually like predatory in any way, and in most of these cases, it was the government that allowed that to happen in the first place. It is so funny to see that. And you really need to keep in mind that these socialistic types, these communistic types, are always trying to get you to believe that the problem is the free market. They're always trying to get you to do that, and they will always ignore the fact that these companies are extremely funded by the government and are only as big as they are because of the government and because of government regulations that prevent competition from being feasible. They'll always ignore that because they have a vested interest in the government owning all of the means of production. It's funny to see a lot of these socialistic types call themselves social democrats, because it really is just a propaganda term. And, I think that's where I'm going to leave you today. This has been Breaking on the Daily. I'm Cal Kidman. I'm out.